So we have a conundrum. What should we name this episode? See, we should have not named the dev blogs and just had them numbered, and this all would be easier.
See, okay, look, my trick on naming things is to use a placeholder name. So the podcast it tested was still entitled. My company was Foo, which is, the placeholder for functions. If you just use placeholder names, you never have to come up with a name.
The temp name for the Anacrusis was Space.
Oh, it's not the
because I don't want to make a good fake name.
Yeah,
Like,
if you make a good,
I've run into that where we've done a good. So Left 4 Dead was originally Terror, Terror, Terror.
That's a pretty good fake name,
right?
Yeah, that's
too good.
Yeah, if you do it too good, then you get stuck with it. People get attached to it, and then you can't let it go. And it's time to get the branding people on board.
Yes, and so we jumped through hoops trying to figure it out, and came up with one where we bought a domain name, went with it and everything, and then decided against it. And then I just asked Gabe, can you give us one more week? We will come up with something. And actually Eric Wolpaw came up with Left 4 Dead. Then Mark said, let's keep it real and put the number 4 in there. And we all hate him ever since for that.
I mean, look, the 4 in there told me exactly that game was for millennials, but who were youthful back then, right?
Yes.
And also it gave you the opportunity with the fingers on the like the key art for that game is tough, right? Because like the common wisdom on stuff is that you put a face on the cover of the thing, and you don't put 4 faces on the cover of the thing because that's too confusing. People are like, I don't know which face to look at. I don't know I shouldn't buy this. It's confusing me and making me sad. So putting the zombie hand there, pretty good big brain moment.
If you lived in Bellevue in 2007 and went into a GameStop, there was a chance that you saw some unknown games on the shelves with different box covers, and you're testing box covers for Left 4 Dead. And the 4 characters just weren't showing really well. That was the problem. And there's a whole bunch of things we tried. And then we did, like, remember the Band of Brothers, the relief picture and stuff? And there's a version of that.
They're holding arms.
And I kind of got in an argument with Gabe. I'm like, that's just not the game we're making. Valve makes Half-Life, which is like a symphony orchestra. It's this beautiful thing. And Left 4 Dead's this just noisy college rock, just smashing things together, noisy, puke-filled, just craziness. And he's like, all right. And then he's just like, what does that mean then? What is that like? Give me your tagline. What does that look like? And that's where we came up with zombie apocalypse with your friends.
Yeah, see,
and that came out of that meeting. But it was like literally an hour of just being berated for, hey, yeah, you said no, so what did we do then? And which is a fair point.
Well, it's hard to come up when you're doing something new. It's like you don't have framing for it, right? You can look at what everybody else did for other shooters, but that doesn't help tell your story for, hey, it's a shooter you play with it's a single player shooter you play with 3 other people, and it's going to be different every time, right? Like that's a weird concept.
Battlefield, Call of Duty, they're all the single guy either facing you or facing away and walking, and yeah.
Military dude with a Mosin is easy to understand, it turns out, in the modern shooter context.
CSGO had a version of its logo like that, but then we went back to the classic kind of artwork there.
Well, I remember what Condition Zero or something had, when there were retail boxes for CS, there was like a guy in counter-terrorist gear with the gun staring dead at the camera, spiking it. So
there was a box release of CSGO, but only in Russia.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's where all the box releases are, it turns out.
All right. So that's naming past.
Yeah, what's naming present, Chet?
And now we're naming present. But so the reason we're thinking about talking about this podcast is there's this thing about making games that you often don't realize are these little pain in the ass things that you eventually need to do. Here, Left 4 Dead, for example, the original poster, the poster that I actually have hanging and signed in the office, has the right hand in the poster. We didn't think to have the left hand in the poster because Left 4 Dead, right? It all works. We weren't that smart. It seems obvious. And it was actually, we read the comments, and a Kotaku commenter said, why don't you have it be the left hand? And we were like,
what? Hold on. I don't understand the difference between the right hand and the left hand. Like, why is the left hand? Is it the palm facing out or the outside facing
It's
out?
it's it's the left or right hand based on where the thumb is, because the other fingers, we
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
chew off the thumb.
yeah. But okay, I'll put a picture of the poster here so people understand what we're talking about.
Yes. So but yeah, so that, like, just naming's hard, and context is hard. And so when we were trying to name the Anacrusis, the Anacrusis, first of all, is a bad name that breaks a lot of rules.
What are the rules? Are people have to be able to say it?
Yes.
If it's a word that means things, people have to know what it means.
And people need to know how to spell it.
Yeah. Okay.
So the weird thing about the Anacrusis is it actually spells like it sounds, and it sounds like it spells. And the thing we were going against was that this had Outer World and Outer Wilds and like all these different star games. And boy, if you go back through time and see what's available copyright wise, there's so much science fiction. And is it light years away? Or then we came up with some names, but they sounded dark and gloomy. And we're like, well, our game's light and fun. So we're like, let's come up with an imaginary word that sounds 70s sci-fi. And while trying to do that, there's a song by called Faded Flowers. And band has a lot of other music that's more dancey. This is a little more or bleak. And so in there, he said, it's not the main event, it's the Anacrusis. The fight remains, or something like that. I'm like, oh, that works. That works really well. I kind of like that. And the band's Shriekback. And so we tested that with a bunch of people and came forward. And I think I kept emailing right before the announcement of what it was going to be, of like, are we sure this is the right name? Are we sure this is the right name? So it breaks a lot of rules. It still worries me. It's something, you worry about a lot of things, but that's the name we went with. And it is our name.
I mean, the good thing is we don't have an Anacrusis situation. We don't have an Outer Wilds, Outer World situation where we have the same structure for the name and people are going to get madly confused between the two. It's lucky both of the games turned out to be pretty good in that case.
Yes.
So
you should play both of those games.
So the thing that struck true as somebody who's new to making games is the thing you said about there being an infinity of tiny tasks that absorb an equal sized amount of time. Like it's so many tiny things. Like how do you, like, localization is a perfect one, but we spent as a result of doing localization this week and last week, we spent a ton of time naming things.
Yes.
Like that. I guess I never considered everything that you do in the game, all the things you pick up, all of the things you get as rewards, all of the things you're doled out in the course of playing the game. Everything has to have a name. And it takes so much time and thought to come up with intelligent, systematic, predictable names for all of the things that go into a game.
Well, because also when you're naming things, you have to go, who's saying this? Like, where's this voice come from? So achievements, I often joke, are the one place you're allowed to make puns, because they're the team making the game who's aware of other games, and that's kind of the voice you're allowed to use. Puns are the lowest form of comedy, but they live inside of achievements very well. Well, I don't know if we actually use puns, or we use a lot of 70s songs and stuff.
Yeah, we started trying, like the game we started playing, because this happened kind of late in the day, was which 70s song titles or lyrics can we shoehorn into the description that we have for this achievement. Yes. And as a result, there's a lot of 70s and a little bit of 80s and a little bit of 60s.
But those are fun. Naming the characters is fun, because like so all the characters, who they are, and their names often come from something through space flight. Like, so Guillaume is the first African-American in space.
Well, his namesake is.
Yes, correct. His Guillaume Buford. And our character's name is Guillaume Johnson, because Johnson was the first African-American astronaut, but he died in a crash he's a test pilot. And back in the 60s, test pilot death, there's a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, it was crazy times.
Yeah.
But so like all the characters are named that way. And kind of having some fun with that kind of thing. So those are like fun to do.
Well, does that get into things? I mean, does that help you give you, like, does that help you center the characters when you're writing them? Like you have these, like, they're not namesakes, or they're not, but they're like name inspirations for the characters.
It's the beginning of the framing, right? Because some of that is like I'll go watch some videos. There's like a lot of coverage of some of those astronauts, and like, what are they like? It's just because you have to, everything's random in the sense of that where it comes from,
Yeah.
but you can come from inspiration and then be consistent. And so that's one way to do that. And like our namings in the game for like UI elements, we frame the game as being a 60s/70s sci-fi TV show.
Mm-hmm.
So then we don't want to have a bunch of military terms in there because that doesn't quite fit it. So like we got into what loadout, I think, was the word that we struggled with. Like, is loadout the right word? It
Well,
is what it is, but is it the right word?
I mean, I think we ended up going with loadout. I can't remember now.
Yes, we did, because it is the perfect word for what it
Yeah,
is.
but it's not like, in a military game you might call it an ammo belt or ammo pouch or something like that. And for us, it makes sense to be like, oh yeah, here's the stuff our scientists take when they go out on expeditions, right?
Yes.
The so this is one of those things that you talked about. Okay, so achievements are in our voice, like the developer's voice. In-world perks, on the other hand, the things that you collect from matter compilers as you're going throughout the game, are firmly in Boris's voice, or
Correct.
the voice of a character in the world, who you'll get to know later. I forget I said the word that I said just then.
Practical scientist's voice.
Yes.
We didn't do him in, we were tempted to do him in Lance's voice as if it was his company and very much in salesman speak, but realized that that would be exhausting.
Yeah,
And you
like,
also, and it's also something in game you want to read really quickly, have an understanding of, and make a choice on.
so having it being very practical and clear and concise is both a design goal and something to make it, like, we intend to be adding to these for years. So
Yeah.
when we add another crop of 40 in a few months, I don't want to have to sit down and get back in Lance's headspace again, because frankly it's exhausting.
Well, it's like when people do blog posts like this and they do them in some kind of voice, like, I'm going to be the sci-fi bot from the future. Like when they're in their like 30th blog post, you're like, oh, why did we pick that? God, I don't want to do this anymore. It's just exhausting. So I like to do things that you can go back to do and be able to live with. So the perks are one that we keep adding to, but then we have some other elements in the game that have like a little bit more fun with them. Some of the challenges and some of the
Mhm.
other things that people will come see over time have some different kind of things. More the meta game has more achievement-y kind of names.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, some of that stuff is really literal. Some of it's like just kill X number of aliens, or block a goo ball, or whatever it is. But yeah, some of it is definitely some of it we had fun with that people, I think, will enjoy later on when we get the game actually out in the world and people can play it. What about the specials? I don't think we've ever talked about this before, but this all happened before I started. We have the brute, the spawner, the gooper, or sometimes the gooer, depending on who you're asking. The grabber, and the flasher. I think that's everybody.
So we couldn't call the gooer the slimer because that just seemed
Hmm.
too much like Ghostbusters, and they owned that.
Yeah,
And I kind of like that though, so I'm sad.
but you could have. I
But
mean, you could
equally,
have.
I'm happy because I really like the movie
You
Ghostbusters.
could have real Ghostbusters that and just put an ape there instead of the gooper, and then called the ape Slimer, and then it wouldn't be an infringement anymore. I think this is you're too old for this one. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Um, but in general, these are people who are not that familiar with the things that they're fighting, and so they named them. We actually have in the first episode, depending when you load in, you might get the little story of naming. They all have that little story. Um, and it's about the reaction to what you see, and it's often the physicality of what the thing's doing. Kind of like to name things that way. But what I'd like to do is over time is that's you get nicknames and the weird ways you reference your enemies over time of fighting them, and you have familiarity with them. And so I'd like our game to actually try by like season 2 or 3, you're actually calling the gooer something else, or the gooper something else, and like we're actually evolving the names as the characters are kind of living with them and fighting them.
This is one of my favorite things that happened in early PUBG. Before, when they released that game, the map hardly had any labels on it.
Yes.
And as a result, if you played with the regular groups of people, one group would call one building a Wizard Tower, and then another group would call it Harry Potter's. And one thing was called, one group called it the prison, and one group called it the 12 pack because there were 12 buildings there. And that, like, the evolution of language that happened in the player base
Yeah.
was this amazing magical thing that made it really hard for like the esports commentators and all that, I'm sure. But like for us as players, it was always fun to see what people called different things when you jumped into a game with some new friends.
Well, but so I mean that's one of the things I want to do. Like when I say we want to evolve the names over time, I'm not just going to be sitting in my room one day with smoking my pipe and doing my writing. Instead, it's going to be like listening to the community and how do the community references these things? How do we have our shared language grow over time and then reflect that back to the community?
Yeah, that's exactly it. What else? Let's see. What else do we have to name? We name that. We name the UI stuff. We name the perks. We name the achievements. We name the enemies. We name the characters. Hey, what do we call when you get knocked all the way? You get knocked down and you're laying on the ground with a pistol, shooting at helping your friends, and then something happens and you're not there anymore.
You're not dead.
No, you're not
dead.
What
happens in our game when you get knocked down, you get teleported back to the jump ship, where you get rejuvenated.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get teleported back in when they place a beacon in the world.
They probably the player presses a button. The people who are alive still. What's that called, Chet?
So you don't die.
Yeah.
You respawn.
Yeah. Are we rejuvied?
Rejuvenation is just a fun word to talk in a non-serious way. In game, it's awkward. You're not revived because I consider reviving when you're down and you get brought back up.
Yeah. You're not picked up because that's when you're partway down, but you can get back up again. This is a hard one. I'd love to see what people think in the comments, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's throw this one to the people rather than do it live.
Yeah. And to be clear, like that doesn't sound like that bad, except when you have a day of going through all the final namings of things, and that takes a half hour of your day, and you're just exhausted and you're getting punchy already. And you're like, we should just redo the entire game and just kill you. It'll be easier. And you're like, yeah, no, we shouldn't do that.
Oh, that I think that's as good a place as any to wrap it up. Jet's killed me again. If you would like to know more about the game, you can go to our Steam page at j.mp/theanacrusis, ANACRUSIS. You can mash the subscribe button down here. There's links all around us. We're actively recruiting regular playtesters. We watch people play multiple times a week. And you can do that on our Discord at discord.gg/StrayBombay.
Which, by the way, so the company name, Stray Bombay Company, comes from, we're a company.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
My cats are strays, and their breed is Bombay.
And so the cat that's on the Stray Bombay logo was the cat we were listening to meowing at the start of that's Boris.
Boris wanted to play with the laser and was not going to let us record this until we took a little break and played with the laser.
Boris has a lot of opinions about the game, it turns out.
Yes.
But yeah, that's it. We'll see you all next week with another dev blog. Thanks for hanging out. Bye, everybody.
See ya.